Hello and welcome to Sound Like, and in today's video we're going to be looking at my recent cover of Big Freeze. I'll be going over my general approach for creating my sound for this song, from the guitar, the pedals, and my amp simulation rig that I use. As always, I'm not going to say that you need specific pedals for this song, just a general type of sound based on what I'm going to be demonstrating. So for example, a distortion, an overdrive, and delay will do just fine. And before we get started, I'd say this song is a great example of getting the most out of your board, from having a distinct sound for each section, but with little change in your signal chain. It's up to you how much you take from this video, but this is how I sound like Big Freeze. Throughout my cover, I wanted to remain as faithful as possible to the sound that you can hear in the original version. That sound being that twangy, out-of-phase sound that you'd more closely associate with The Edge. The song to me sounds like a good blend between Queen and U2, the vocals, drums and bass handling that Queen side of things, and with the guitar handling all of the U2 sound, or more specifically, The Edge. Now you don't have to go for this sound, and especially if you don't have the right guitar for it. To get that type of sound, you'd need something like a Stratocaster or a Telecaster. For that, you'd need to go for the middle pickup position on the Tele and the bridge and middle pickup on the Strat. Now I could have gone for my own Strat for my cover, but it's not quite as bright as I really want it to, so I went for my Tele, as I always seem to do in my sound likes and covers. That particular twangy sound that we're looking for is a staple and commonly used sound by The Edge, and you can hear it on songs like Where the Streets Have No Name and With or Without You. Humbuckers are too chunky to achieve this type of sound. You really need something thin and more clear cut than something as broad and strong as you do get from humbuckers. Moving over to the pedals I'm using for this song, it's much more useful to talk about them in context with the amps I'm using with them. In my cover, there's two channels for the main guitar that you can hear, both of those being my Vox type sound. Both of these amps are designed to be quite clean, but one of them has my MXR Timmy overdrive in front of it with a little bit of kick in there, so that there is a distinct sound difference between the two. The settings on my Timmy overdrive are the gain at 12 o'clock roughly, bass at 10, and my treble at around 2 or 3 o'clock. The brightness from the pedal helps to bring that twangy quality from the guitar out even further, and the difference in gain helps to separate the sounds from each amp, but also as only one of those amps has a bit of gain on it, it's not driving too much. As we'll see later on, we need a lot of dynamic range with each section. To add some depth and ambience to this sound, I'm bringing in some delay. Now it's not doing anything crazy or anything like that. The BPM is just tapped into the song, feedback at around 12 o'clock, and the level is just a little bit under what you can really hear, so it adds in some depth without being too overpowering. It is worth pointing out at this stage that my pedal board is in stereo, and having a stereo delay really adds to that sense of depth and ambience in the sound. If you've got a mono board, you can still use a delay at this stage and in the same sort of settings that I've used. When it comes to the drive section, there it kind of gets a little bit open to interpretation. I would suggest that you do use an overdrive in the same sort of way that I'm using here, but roll off the gain on the guitar a little bit so that you can open up for later sections. To me, a clean type sound doesn't quite have the level of punch that we really need for this sort of sound, so a little bit of dirt does go a long way, especially as we're going to see later on. As I keep saying, the song is going to open up with each section, and you really want to emphasize that as best you can. On the original song, we can hear this kind of step sequenced pitch shifting type sound that's going through the guitar. It's very similar to what we hear on Map of the Problematic. Now I could have recreated this sound, but I decided to take it as a kind of open to interpretation affair. What I decided to use was a granular synthesis plugin that I've been using for a while now. It's completely optional, and I'm not expecting anyone to try and recreate the sound specifically, and when I play the song on my own time, I don't use it. It's just a nice to have for the cover's sake. The plugin itself just kind of has a similar sort of sound in that it kind of bounces between kind of different frequencies in the guitar. I won't get too technical into it, but it's just a little bit different, and like I said, it's just kind of open to interpretation. It is purely peripheral and it's not a core part of the sound, but I imagine that some people may have heard it in my cover and wanted to know what it was, and you have my blessing to completely ignore it. So we've got all the components that we want, so what does it sound like? The pre-chorus sound is very straightforward. We take the verse sound and simply remove the delay, so we lose the ambience and the density, leaving us with a very straightforward and fairly strong sound. At this point I'm still only driving one of the amps, so for you monoboard users, don't increase the gain on your guitar just yet. The other thing to note here is your strumming pattern. We've gone from what we had in the verse, which is very simple and straightforward, to something a lot more rhythmic, stronger, and much more detailed. It might be a bit obvious to say, but I still think it's worth pointing out. All we're doing in terms of the signal chain is removing the delay, and your performance has a real big impact on your sound. So it's really worth keeping in mind just how important your strumming pattern for the pre-chorus really is. I also would mention that that sort of strumming style will really bring out that twangy sort of sound even more, as those singular strokes we hear on the verse doesn't really bring out that sound quite enough. But the playing style that we're going for in the pre-chorus will really resonate with that sort of sound. So with that really simple change, what does it sound like? Once again, the changes we're making here aren't that dramatic, but it makes that change all the more important. And what I'm doing here is putting the drive on both of the amps. So for you monoboard users, this is where you'd finally open up the gain on your guitar. Alternatively, if you don't want to do that, what I would suggest is just going for a clean boost type sound and then adding a little bit of grit for this particular part. The aim here is to get something a bit louder and more powerful than what we've had previously in the other sections. But also keep in mind that this sound needs to be quite strong, but also clear. So going for a low gain, high volume approach will work wonders. So a compressor in the front of your drive section would also help as well. Anything that's going to retain that clarity as you get from a clean sound will really benefit you here. Anything that's really going too overdriven is going too far and you'll lose that detail. For the context of my cover, I'm still using the same amps and still using my telly on the same pickup setting. The only thing that's changing is the particular position of where my Timmy overdrive is in the overall signal chain. Sticking with the context of my cover, what I'm also doing at this point is actually adding an overdriven guitar that's following the bass line. It's completely up to you if you want to pay attention to it, but it's not absolutely critical to the sound. What we're focusing on in this video is actually the core and more interesting part of the sound. The overdriven guitar is there just to fill in some of the gaps that I found whilst making the cover. So keeping that in mind, I'm not going to demonstrate that overdriven guitar. It's literally exactly what you've probably got in your mind. A simple overdrive tone, not being too kind of out there in the mix, just supporting the bass. If you want to listen to it, go and check out my cover. What we're going to listen to now is that main chorus sound. So now we're going to look at the solo and to see how differently the sound changes here when compared to the rest of the song. Previously we've had a simple clean boost or a very light crunch with a jangly single coil type sound. Now we're throwing all of that away, bringing in some distortion and a humbucker, and completely changing the amps as well. If you're playing this live, you obviously can't just switch out your guitar unless you're Stevie Ray Vaughan. But he's dead, so switch your guitars at your own risk, I guess. What you can do though is switch up your pedals, and if you can, maybe your amp simulation as well, if you simulate your amps. If not, just your pedals. In the context of playing live, I'd simply suggest to switch over to your bridge pickup and swap out the drive section that you've got. Looking at the sound beyond the guitar, I bring out the Timmy overdrive and replace it with my MXR prime distortion. It's got the right sort of sound, not too much low end, and a really good crisp sound. With the gain turned up to about 3 o'clock or more, it really does come through and pack quite a punch. So I would suggest in this sort of context, for the sort of sound that you want to go for, is a distortion type sound, one that's got a lot of power to it. But I would suggest suggest to shy away from a lot of low end and have a lot of mid focus to really help that punch through. As well as the distortion, I'm bringing back in my delay sound on roughly the same sort of settings that we've had before. It's completely up to you. I do keep the same sort of sound, as that kind of little bit of ambience to kind of help round out that sound does go a long way. If you want to get something a little bit more dramatic, you can increase the level or play around with the feedback. I would suggest to do one, not both, but just to kind of experiment with that sound will go a long way to get you a sound that you really enjoy. The main focus for this sound is to have the actual dry guitar being the front and center for this. Having too much delay would be a little bit distracting and kind of be completely different from the sound that you're trying to get. Looking beyond the pedals now and the amps that I'm using two sets of amps that I like to use quite a lot. The first being my stadium type sound, which is just two of the same amp, just panned hard left and hard right in the mix. Very simple and straightforward. It's kind of like generally my big sound one I more use for riff type sounds. It's got a lot of kind of low end punch to it because the kind of distortion that we're using doesn't pack a lot of low end to it. Whatever we get low end wise does really come out, and the fact that I kind of bend lower down the neck for little bits does help accentuate those sounds and really adds to that kind of sonic kind of range that we've got. I think it sounds great. It's completely up to you, and because I can simulate my amps, it's something that I really enjoy doing. If for mono board users and for people who don't simulate amps and you're stuck with just the one, stuck isn't the right word, it's completely up to you if you want to go for something like that. Usually you're going to be kind of locked into one sound. The kind of approach to go around the neck and do those bends is not a must, it's just a nice little to have, and to get the most you can out of your sound is really important. It's completely up to you. I like to do it, it's just a little bit of fun. The other amp pair that I use is my Marshall and Orange type sound. This is where it kind of really focuses on the mid sounds, and having two very different amps kind of covers a lot of ground. Pairing this all together, I would say, gets a really big and impressive type sound, and something that massively contrasts against all the other sounds that we've seen previously. It is also worth pointing out at this stage that in the cover I did use a guitar that has a Sustainiac pickup in it. It's completely optional, it is not a core part of the sound, it's just a nice to have, the same as just kind of being all over the neck for those little bits. It's not a core part, it's just a nice to have. If you don't have a guitar with a Sustainiac pickup on it, it's not at all the problem. The kind of the main notes that you're playing and the real sound that you're going for is the key part. Everything else is just kind of a pointless peripheral. But it's just a nice to have pointless peripheral, I guess. Before I demonstrate the sound, it's worth just looking at how different this sound is compared to the rest of the song. The previous sections that we've had make incremental changes as they've gone on, meaning that they're quite related to one another. They just have that distinct sound. What we're going to here is a complete dimensional shift, and it's, again, as I said, it's really something I enjoy seeing in guitar sound design. Little changes to emphasize how much those changes can be, and then a dramatic change to kind of really show just how versatile the guitar really is as an instrument. So let's put all that together and listen to what it sounds like. Coming out of the solo and going into the final chorus, I do like to add a little bit more extra drive into the sound. It's based on the same sort of sound that we've had in the other choruses, but when compared to what we hear from the solo, to go back down to that kind of pushed sound isn't quite enough. So what I like to do is add some overdrive on top of the chorus sound that we've been over already. It's completely up to you if you want to do it and if you have a pedal that's suitable for that sort of sound. I won't demonstrate it, all it'll be is just exactly the same sound with just a little bit more grit behind it. My main reason for doing it is that to come down from such a big sound, again, is a kind of a bit kind of immersion breaking and just kind of gives you something else to craft and have something else to look forward to and enjoy. Completely optional, you just might want to think about it. And with that, we've covered how to sound like Big Freeze. Hopefully you found it useful. What did you think about it? Was it any good? Like, comment and subscribe and let me know what you thought about it in the comments below and what songs you'd like me to cover in future sound like videos. Do keep in mind that everything I've shown you in this video isn't what you'd need to get. So when I've used an overdrive, just think of an overdrive, and same with the sort of guitar approach. To get something that's going to get you that jangly tone is the main focus. I'm not saying you need to go out and get a Telecaster with a modified pickup in it for that specific sound. Just that general broad sound is what you want to go for, or at least to have as a starting position. After all, my stuff is very different from what the gear you may have, so embrace those differences and really just use this video as a platform to get you started to make your own Big Freeze sound, I guess. Do keep in mind that everything I've shown you in this video is just more of a suggestion rather than saying you need to go for this specific distortion or overdrive and so on. Just use this video as a kind of a good starting point to get your own Big Freeze sound. So whenever I say use a distortion, just think of a distortion or the distortion that you have. Don't necessarily go out and get the pedals that I'm using. Just keep it in mind that just have fun with it. So I'll catch you in the next video. I've been Harry, and thanks for watching.